Once upon a time, in the village of Anshati, nestled deep within the dense forest, a legend has been passed down for generations. It was said that a powerful spirit, known as the Nightwalker, roamed the village after 10 p.m., preying on anyone who dared to venture out. The villagers believed that the Nightwalker was a wicked spirit with an insatiable hunger for human flesh. The villagers, including the poor, would struggle every day to make enough money to buy offerings for the night walker. They believed that if they didn't leave offerings, the night walker would come for them and they would be devoured. The poor would work tirelessly from dusk till dawn, doing menial jobs for little pay, just so they could afford to buy a few scraps of food or a handful of coins to leave as offerings. They would go to bed with empty stomachs, their hunger and fatigue forgotten in their desperation to appease the night walker. The villagers would often sacrifice their own needs and desires to ensure they had enough for the offerings. They would go without new clothes or repairs to their home or even medical care so they could afford to buy offerings for the night walker. The fear of the night walker was so great that it had become a crushing burden on the villagers. They were trapped in a cycle of poverty and fear with no escape in sight. As night fell, the villagers would hurry to complete their daily task, fearful of being caught outside when the night walker emerged. They would leave offerings outside their doors, crops, money, and even livestock in the hopes of appeasing the spirit. By morning, the offerings would vanish and the villagers would breathe a sign of relief, believing that the night walker has been satisfied. Meanwhile, at the center of the village stood a grand mansion, home to the generous and wealthy Mr. Onwusu. His source of wealth was a mystery, but his generosity and kindness had earned him the respect and admiration of the villagers. Mr. Onwusu's mansion was a grandiose structure that stood at the center of the village. It was a symbol of his wealth and status, and it was a place of wonder and awe for the villagers. The mansion was surrounded by high walls, adorned with intricate carvings and decorations. The walls were painted white and the roof was a deep burnished red. Inside the mansion, the floors were made of polished woods and the walls were adorned with colorful tapestries. The furniture were expensive and the rooms were filled with scents of incense and perfume. Despite his wealth, Mr. Owusu was known for his generosity. He would often host lavish feasts and celebrations, inviting the entire village to attend. He would give gifts to the villagers, especially during the time of need. He would provide food and shelter to the poor and homeless, and he would often offer financial assistance to those who were struggling. Mr. Nwosu's generosity had earned him respect and admiration of the villagers. They saw him as a kind and benevolent leader, a man who cared deeply about the well-being of his community. In that same village, there lived a young boy named Kofi. He was always curious about everything, with a mind full of questions and a heart full of wonders. He would often ask questions that made the villagers uncomfortable, and they would try to hush him. Kofi had always wondered if anyone had seen the night walker, and he would often sneak glances at the villagers, hoping to catch a glimpse of fear or uncertainty. There were many descriptions of the night walker, but each one was different. Some said it had glowing eyes, while others claimed it had sharp teeth and claws. Kofi had once asked if the night walker had eaten anyone the villagers knew about, but no one seems to know anyone who had fallen victim to the spirit. The villagers would often warn Kofi not to speak about the night walker again, but this only made his curiosity grow stronger. One fateful night, Kofi decided to uncover the truth about the night walker. He snuck out of his house, careful not to make a sound, and hid behind a bush. The moon was full overhead, casting an eerie glow over the village. As the clock struck 10 p.m., a mighty figure with two horns emerged from the shadow. He was dressed in a long flowing robe and his presence seemed to command respect. The figure was accompanied by a horse which seemed to be carrying a carriage full of foodstuff and money. Kofi's heart pounded with excitement and fear as he watched the figure move from house to house, collecting the offerings. The sound of the horses' hoofs echoed throughout the village, and the figure's robes billowed behind him like a dark cloud. But as the figure drew closer, Kofi's eyes widened in shock. It was Mr. Onwonsu, the wealthy and respected elder in the village. Kofi could not believe his eyes. What was Mr. Onwunsu doing outside at this time of the night? As Kofi watched, Mr. Onwunsu made horrible noises to further convince the villagers that he was a spirit. He loaded the offerings into the carriage and drove off into the night, leaving Kofi stunned and confused. Kofi then realized that he had stumbled upon a dark secret. He quietly followed the horse and was led to Mr. Onwunsu's house. There, he saw three other chiefs in the village happily welcoming Mr. Onwunsu. They were all wearing the same attire, and their carriages were full of foodstuff and money from the villagers. This meant that the so-called spirits were actually four greedy men who had been exploiting the village. Kofi quietly went back home, his mind racing with thoughts. Kofi knew that he had to share the discovery with the rest of the villagers. The next morning, he gathered the villagers together and told them what he had seen. But to his surprise, they didn't believe him. "That is impossible," one of the villagers said. "Mr. Onwunsu is a respected elder. He will never do such a thing," another argued. But Kofi was adamant. He knew what he had seen, and he was determined to expose the truth. He suggested that three brave men hide with him that night, and if Mr. Onwunsu was caught, a signal would be sent for the villagers to come out and see for themselves. The villagers didn't agree at first, but Kofi's conviction eventually won over them. Three brave men, all of whom were known for their strength and courage, agreed to hide with Kofi that night. As the sun began to set, Kofi and the three brave men made their way to the designated hiding spot. They hid behind a thick clutter of bushes, watching the road that led to Mr. Onwunsu's mansion. As Kofi and the brave men hid behind the bush, they couldn't help but feel a sense of fear. They have heard stories about the nightwalker, and the thought of the confronting spirit was daunting. At first, the brave men were scared, their hearts racing with anticipation. They glanced nervously at each other, wondering if they had made a mistake by agreeing to hide with Kofi. But as they waited, their fear began to give way to curiosity. They eagerly waited to see the face of the spirit, to catch a glimpse of the creature that has been terrorizing their village for so long. As the clock struck 10 p.m., they heard the sound of horse hooves echoing through the thin air. The brave men exchanged nervous glances, their hearts pounding in unison, and then suddenly the nightwalker came into view. He was dressed in a long flowing robe, wearing a cap with two horns. As the nightwalker drew closer, the brave men held their breaths. They were expecting to see a monster, a creature with glowing eyes and razor-sharp claws. But as the nightwalker stepped into the moonlight, they realized with shock that Kofi had been right. The nightwalker was not a spirit at all, but a man, and not just any man, but Mr. Onwunsu, the wealthy and respected elder of the village. The brave men could not believe their eyes, their minds reeling with implications of what they were seeing. They exchanged glances with Kofi, who nodded silently, his eyes shining with a mixture of fear and happiness. And then, in a flash of movement, the brave men sprang into action, catching Mr. Onwunsu off guard. That night, the villagers did not sleep. They had been waiting anxiously for the signal. As soon as they heard the signal, they rushed to the scene, torches and lanterns in their hand. They were shocked and outraged to see that Mr. Onwunsu, the man they had respected and admired, is standing before them in his shameful disguise. The villagers quickly bound Mr. Onwusu's hands and feet and began to drag him through the village, shouting and screaming to alert the others. The news spread like wildfire and soon the entire village was awake. As they made their way to the market square, the villagers grew more and more agitated. Women and children came out of their homes, mocking Mr. Onwusu and throwing things at him. The once respected elder was now a laughingstock, a symbol of greed and deception. The market square was soon filled with people, all of them eager to see the man who had deceived them for so long. Mr. Onwusu was thrown to the ground, his hands and feet still bound. The villagers surrounded him, shouting and screaming, demanding why he had betrayed their trust. One of the brave men stepped forward to address the crowd. "We have been deceived by one of our own," he said, his voice filled with sorrow and anger. Mr. Owusu confessed that him and the other three chiefs have been pretending to be the night worker for years, and that is his source of wealth. They had been using the legend to exploit the villagers, taking their food and money for themselves. The villagers were shocked and outraged by the revelation. "Mr. Owusu, you have brought shame and dishonor to the village. You will be punished for your crime," the brave man said. And with that, the villagers began to mete out their own brand of justice. Some of them threw rotten fruits and vegetables at Mr. Owusu. They were very angry because all this while they felt Mr. Onwuso was a good man, not knowing he has been exploiting them, even the poor in the village. He was forced to crawl on his hands and knees, begging for forgiveness. The scene was chaotic and intense, with the villagers venting their anger and frustration on the man who had deceived them. Mr. Owusu and his family were banished from the village and their mansion was abandoned. As for the other chiefs, immediately they heard Mr. Owusu has been caught. They all tried to flee the village before dawn, but the villagers were smarter than them and they were caught. They were also disgraced and banished from the village. From that day on, the villagers no longer believed in the night walker and they were able to come out at night without fear. They realized that the true evil had been living among them, disguising itself as a spirit at night and as a generous man in the daytime. The village of Ashanti was forever changed, and Kofi was hailed as a hero for exposing the truth. The villagers learned a very important lesson about the dangers of superstition and the importance of seeking truth and justice. They began to question the legends and the myths that have been passed down for generations, and they started to see the world in a different light. Thank you very much for listening to this story. If you are new to this YouTube channel, kindly subscribe and wait for other interesting stories like this. Meanwhile, do you think Mr. Owunsu deserved the punishment given to him, considering the fact that he was a generous man in the community? Drop your answers in the comment section.